My guest today is one of the most experienced homeopathic practitioners in Australia. He is a lecturer, an author of multiple books, and the founder and principal of the Australasian College of Hahnemannian Homeopathy. Such a tongue twister. In this episode, we spoke about safely immunising children against potentially harmful diseases homeopathically and detoxing adults and children alike from vaccinations. This episode is 100% going to be suppressed, so I'm going to rely on you, my amazing audience, to share it with everyone you know. Enjoy the episode. Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome back to another episode of the Skin I'm In podcast. I'm your host, Chanel, and this is the space where real stories meet radical self-discovery. Here, you'll find peace through clarity, purpose through inspiration, and the permission to be your authentic self through the stories of men and women who've walked the path before us. If this show moves you, hit that like button, share it with someone you care about, or subscribe so you never miss an episode. That small but powerful act helps the show grow and brings in the guest you most want to hear from. In return, my promise to you is that I'll keep showing up with the raw, the real, and the conversations that crack us wide open, reminding us we're not alone. So, let's dive in and find the light in the shadows together. Dr. Golden, it is an honour to have you on the Skin I'm In. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chanel, and it's a great pleasure to be here. We were talking a little bit off air about your close connections with my homeopathic family and some ex-students of mine, and it's lovely to hear that you're going to spread the word a little bit further. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I find that, especially, and we'll get into the book today, but especially after reading the book, just how little people understand what homeopathy is and what it gives you access to in terms of healing. And so before we get stuck into all of that, a lot of my listeners know what homeopathy is. I've had Leah on the show, obviously, your daughter. Yep. So before we get stuck in, one of the things that really hit me by the time I got to the end of the book was there is very clearly a message you want to share with the world. And so I'd love for you to share with my listeners why you do the work that you do and what that message is that you really want everyone to know.
Yeah, that's a great start. The thing that really got me into this, I mean, I've been doing homeopathic immunisation since 1985, so a fair time. Prior to that, my early experience was in economics mainly and taxation, etc. So I was a very orthodox little chap, and I used to vaccinate my children until one of them was vaccine injured. This is before I even heard what homeopathy was. And that immediately, once I realised that, immediately made me stop vaccinating and start researching. And back then, 45 so years ago or more, there was very little information available. And I got what I could. And then fortuitously, some years later, not many, I decided to change my career path to natural medicine because I'd always been interested in simple natural things, simple foods and fresh air and sunshine like the old naturopaths used to do.
Yeah.
And to my amazement, when I came across homeopathy and got a book called Hahnemann's Lesser Writings. Now, Dr. Samuel Hahnemann was the founder of homeopathy. And for most people, lesser writings basically means a summary of the articles and the books, not so much the books, more the articles that he's written. And this is a compilation of those. And he published an article in 1801 about his experience in 1799, which was the first experience of homeopathic immunisation, where he was treating people for a great epidemic, basically, of scarlet fever in his area in Germany as it was moving through the country. But he also then found, because he was a true scientist, he experimented all the time, that the same remedy that would cure people with the disease could be used to actually prevent people getting the disease. He found this out because he was treating a young girl in one town with the remedy belladonna, and quite for a totally different reason, not scarlet fever. And then when scarlet fever came into the area, she didn't get it, whereas her other family members did. And so he then realized that the principal basis of homeopathy, which they call the principle of similars, or some people say the law of similars, can be used for prevention as well as treatment. Now, most homeopathy is for treatment around the world. Although, interestingly enough, most of the data that exists for homeopathy is for prevention. And we'll talk about the numbers that are available to, back up claims about effectiveness later on. But so Hahnemann realized that the principle of similars, or the law of similars, worked both ways. It was both sides of the coin, both treatment and prevention. Following that, he also, without even seeing a case of cholera, got symptom pictures of the people with cholera. I think it was in Russia at the time, from some new homeopaths over there. And he worked out which remedy would be most suitable to use as a preventative. And remedies like belladonna and cuprum metallicum for cholera are what we call genus epidemicus remedies. They're remedies that can both treat people with the symptoms of the disease as well as people who have not been exposed from getting the disease symptoms once they're exposed. That is different to remedies we call nosos. I don't want to get too technical too quickly, but they're remedies that are actually prepared from the organism itself, from the virus, from the bacterium, whatever. So there is more than one way to actually immunize people homeopathically. Hahnemann, back in 1799, used the first genus epidemicus remedy. Most of the time, I use the nosos, but sometimes I'll use a genus epidemicus remedy. It was interesting, actually, when COVID first hit in 2020, the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, actually was given a genus epidemicus remedy to prevent COVID by the researchers at the CCRH in Delhi, the Central Council for Research in Homeopathy, because in India, homeopathy is part of their orthodox medical system, part of the Ministry of Ayush, which is effectively the Ministry of Natural Medicine, and the H at the end of Ayush is homeopathy. So we've come a long way, but back before I knew all of this, I first came across Hahnemann's essay on the cure and prevention of scarlet fever that was in his lesser writings. And for me, it was like the penny dropped. And I knew that this was what I had to do, because that's, as a parent, this is what I would have loved to have known when I was making what I thought was an informed decision about how to prevent infectious diseases with my own child back then, who unfortunately suffered because it was an informed decision, given that the only information I had back then was from doctors. But nowadays, of course, I've seen so much evidence from my own practical work with thousands and thousands of families, as well as going to places like Cuba 4 times, India 6 times, and other places as well, collecting data, how effective, comparably to vaccines, HP or homeoprophylaxis or homeopathic immunisation is, but also how safe it is. And that's why I called the book we're going to chat about Safe Immunisation, because really what I want to show people, and not just in Australia but around the world, is that we could actually reduce the incidence of chronic illness by governments in other countries and in this country just saying to parents, right, we will give you an unfettered choice how you immunise or protect your child against things like whooping cough, RSV, etc. In other words, we're not trying to force people to do one thing or the other. We're not discriminating against people economically or socially if they do one choice or the other, because the choices, as we'll talk about, I hope, are so comparable in terms of effectiveness. But the one difference, the huge difference, is safety. And if people around the world, parents around the world, were allowed to make a free, open, informed, and scientific choice between either vaccination and homeoprophylaxis, then the incidence of chronic illness would fall, because we have such a large amount of data now comparing the long-term health, medium to long-term health of fully vaccinated children or adults, but mainly children, and vaccinated children. And we're talking about chronic illness. I mean, it differs from disease to disease, but 3 to 15 times greater in the vaccinated group. It would make a massive difference.
So, for someone who has never heard of homeoprophylaxis, and we'll call it HP from now on because it is a bit of a tongue twister, so
It is.
HP. How would you explain what it actually is and how it differs from mainstream vaccination? Because I think that's where people get confused. Like, how can this thing be better than or comparable to regular traditional vaccination?
Well, the first thing people have to realise is that there's more than one way to protect a person, to stimulate the immune system, because the immune system defends against infectious diseases in a whole range of ways. And actually, the antigen-antibody response, which is what vaccines prime or attempt to prime, is the last line of defence. It kicks in 3 or 4 days after the person's been exposed to the antigen or the disease material. Before then, there's a whole range of immune mechanisms built into our system, which are dependent on a whole range of different things, inheritance, as well as, what your diet is at the moment. In other words, how healthy the person is. Are they living in a highly stressed situation? Those sorts of things. But even prior to that, the first line of defense against invading antigens is the energetic line of defense. And this, of course, is the line of defense which the pharmaceutical drug cartels and their trainees, most of them, don't accept, because we're not just a physical blob. If nothing else, we've got an emotional self and an intellectual self. And those who are interested in the esoteric would say many other selves. But let's just go with those 3: physical, mental, and emotional. And these are things that can't always be measured in laboratories. And of course, the problem with pharmaceutical-only medicine is that if you can't measure it in a laboratory, it doesn't exist. But we know it does exist. I mean, a person can pick up a phone, receive a call from and someone else they've never met before, never heard of before, who can give them some shocking news. Maybe a relative died suddenly. And that person's hair can turn white overnight from the shock. So that's a material difference made by a non-material stimulus. And there can be thousands of examples. So basically, the other thing we do know, and thanks to Kirlian photography 30, 40 years ago, mainly from Russia, which actually photographs the etheric body, which is, people can see sometimes in the right light a little glow around our physical selves. And it's the lowest form of energetic body, but it's visible and people can see it in the right conditions and photograph it in the right conditions. So we have our physical self, but then we have that energetic body around us. But so does everything on the planet, even the carpet. But certainly something as active as a virus or a bacterium does as well. So to put it very simply, let's say you're a new mum. I think most of your listeners are mums, or dad, it doesn't matter. We're not sexist here. Pushing the pram of the newborn down through the supermarket aisles, and someone with active whooping cough walks past and coughs all over the baby. Now, the first thing that happens, a fraction of a second before the physical bacterium enters the nostrils of the baby, is an interaction between the energetic body of the bub and the energetic body of the bacterium. That's what HP primes. And if it's been properly prepared, then even though the bacterium physically can enter the nostrils, the person won't get the symptoms of the disease. And that's really a perfect response when it happens, because when the bacterium enters the nostrils, that normal antibody-antigen response will result. So the bub will have more antibodies against whooping cough or whatever the thing was than they had before, but they will be free of the disease. So that's how it differs from vaccines. And for some people, that's a difficult conversation. It's a difficult thought to have because it's so different from what we're taught. But we've got to remember, when it comes to health, most of the teachings about health in countries like Australia, the so-called developed countries around the world, come from the pharmaceutical drug cartels that control very tightly not only the education of doctors and nurses and allied health professionals, etc., but control the way they practice in this country in particular, as well as other countries. And we saw this during COVID. And I mean, COVID was a horrible time for all of us, but it also has left one legacy, and that is that there's a lot more people now whose eyes have been opened that the experts, trusting the science, is not always the way to go. I mean, modern medicine is marvellous for certain things. Homeopathy is marvellous for certain things. So's herbal medicine for certain things. So's acupuncture, and nutrition's really important all the time. So there's so many things. But the dominance of pharmaceutical medicine in this country has set back healing so many decades. We have a rate of chronic illness in Australia that's almost as bad as America. Most people don't realise that. The rate in America, given that it's the most expensive health system in the world, is absolutely shocking because they've got one of the highest rates of chronic illness in the world. And thank God, I don't know how long he'll last, but Robert Kennedy is doing wonderful work over there because he's been given the opportunity to try and bring down the rate of chronic disease, chronic illness in America. Vaccination is not the only way. Dealing with that and giving people options. Obviously, nutrition is incredibly important. And one thing Kennedy's been doing, which is great, is just showing how nutritionally poor the American diet is and what impact that's having. So in many ways, hopefully, that country, at the end of 4 years anyway, will be a healthier place and potentially a much healthier place than it was at the beginning of Kennedy's ability to be, his appointment as secretary to the HHS. And, we follow a lot of American habits and trends in medicine in Australia. And I can only hope and pray that that'll be one trend we do follow, because the rate of chronic illness in Australia is really, really dreadful. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. And you know what? I'm like, oh, I could go down a rabbit hole there and I could go down a rabbit hole here. But some of the things that I really appreciate that you've brought up, number one, and I feel like this seems to be the case, especially since COVID, no one is asking for you to choose one or the other when it comes to people that are in the holistic health space. I find that the conversation is you choose what you want, but there are some of us who want a different option. So we're not saying everybody stop immunizing your children and only use homeopathy. We're saying we're giving you another option. If you want it, here's the information. So I really appreciate that you've brought that up, because it's one of the things.
I'll just interrupt you quickly. What we're saying is that you should immunize your child, but there's more than one way to do it. See, the orthodox system has captured the word immunisation. 20, 30 years ago, they never heard that word. Everything was vaccination. But now, of course, vaccination has got other meanings for other people. We're still looking at immunising. That's the point. And that's what politicians need to get into their skulls. We're still talking about protecting not only children, but adults and animals too. It doesn't stop just with humans. Protecting living beings from being infected by potentially dangerous organisms. Now, not all infectious diseases are dangerous in healthy people. Look, everyone of my generation, we had measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox, and God knows what else. And our immune systems prospered because of it. In fact, in orthodox medicine, there's research showing that children who have those diseases when they're young, successfully treated, just allowed to work through in a natural way, have lower incidences of cancers and cardiovascular diseases when they're adults. So that's why in my HP program, I don't try and cover every disease in the vaccine schedule, because some of them can be, if well done, well treated, beneficial later in life. Sorry, just wanted to make that
No,
point.
that's totally okay.
Really
That's really
important.
important.
Yeah.
The other thing that I appreciate is that, maybe not even so much appreciate, but you brought up that the side effects, and even just now you were talking about the data that shows that as adults they are less likely to have some of these chronic diseases. Why do you think there is such hesitation to take or to look at HP as an option?
Okay, there's two reasons. One is most orthodox people don't know what HP is. They have been told that homeopathy in general can't work because it's placebo, even though we've got huge amounts of evidence showing that it does work, even though governments around the world have used HP, since we're talking mainly about HP and not treatment, in literally hundreds of millions of annualized doses. So there's a massive evidence base. They don't think about that. Their minds are so closed by their training that if you can't measure it in a laboratory, it doesn't exist, as I said earlier. So a lot of people don't know about it, or if they hear the word homeopathy, that's the end of their listening. They just stand there closed down. The other main reason is that the pharmaceutical drug cartels make billions a year from vaccines and even more from other medicines. So, and they have control of the health bureaucracies in most countries. They have control, certainly, of the mainstream media. I heard a shocking report on the 7:30 report, ABC, last night, talking about Anthony Fauci, and the presenter, who normally I respect, but didn't have one person who questioned Fauci or what he's done and what the evidence shows that he's done. Everyone was a supporter. It was so biased. But when you have the national broadcaster, putting forward that sort of media discussion about a particular topic, the people listening who are not informed will think, oh, well, poor old Anthony, he was such a nice man, America's doctor. All these other people here are saying how wonderful he was. So that what little bit I might have heard about him, that Dr. Rand Paul, the senator who led the congressional hearing, what a horrible man he must be. He's a doctor. He's medically trained. And so he knew more than anyone else how wrong a lot of Fauci's stuff was. And then the evidence that keeps coming out and coming out about this. So the mainstream media in this country is totally biased. It's such a shame. And we found that out during COVID. Remember, in COVID, the experts said that the science showed that the Pfizer vaccine was 95% effective. Wow, fantastic. It's going to save the world. Then a few months later, well, actually, it's probably closer to 70. And then a few more months later, it's around 40 or 50. And then a few months after that, well, actually, it doesn't prevent the disease, but it means you're safer. If you have to go to hospital, it won't be as bad. And then some months later, even that went. So much so that even Fauci himself, towards the end, I think of 2023, basically acknowledged that the vaccines weren't working to prevent the disease. So, what lies we were given. And we're still being given. The epidemiologists who came out on the ABC and other radio programs regularly saying, well, this is dreadful if we don't do this, if we don't lock down, if we don't social distance, we don't stop kiddies going to school, we're all going to be in a terrible situation. Right early on in the process, 3 of the world's top epidemiologists wrote and published the Great Barrington Declaration, which actually showed that epidemiologists looking at this from an unbiased way said, no, we don't need to social distance everything. We don't need to lock everyone down. We shouldn't stop children going to school. But the experts that were trundled out on the news programs, they were all warning this. And of course, the politicians like little doggies were following along because, they get fed, both sides get fed. And there's very, very few politicians in Australia who had the courage to stand up and say anything public. And of course, if they don't get reported, they're talking to thin air. So, yeah, it's a lesson we must learn, but we haven't learned yet in this country. And I just hope we do.
It is a scary thing to think that those who were trying to sound the alarm and speak the truth were held accountable for the absolute atrocious and inhumane way people like Dr. Fauci went about his day by day. That man has not been held accountable for any of the crimes against humanity. And yet, and all of them, none of them, I could name so many names, but this episode will be heavily suppressed if I do. But those who have been speaking the truth have basically been given the sentencing that those who have been peddling this narrative should have gotten a long time ago. And that's the unfortunate thing. And that scares me because I still hear people saying, if I didn't get the shot, I would have ended up in hospital. And I'm like, oh my God.
I'm been trying to retire for quite a while now, unsuccessfully, but I'm only
going to say, please don't.
I'm only doing 2 things now: immunisation and vaccine injury or vaccine detox, basically. And I'm just busier than I can manage because the repercussions from the COVID vaccines for adults. See, previously, up to COVID, I'd mainly only see children. Occasionally, with the Gardasil vaccine for young women, trying to prevent cervical cancer, etc., I'd see some young women with that mainly, but principally it was children. And it's changed since COVID because every day I'm getting requests from adults saying, I or my husband or my wife or someone I know dearly was affected. It's never been the same. And in homeopathy, we have a little sentence, never well since. And when I used to teach homeopathy face-to-face in colleges, I'd always say, look for the never well since, because if you can find it, you're more than halfway there to treating the person successfully. And vaccines are probably the one thing more than just about anything else, apart from severe traumas, psychological or physical traumas from other things, where a person can look and say, right, ever since I've had this, that's happened, that's gone wrong. I've never been the same since that. Now, if you can find that point, it makes the case so much easier. So, for example, one of the most common never well since scenarios I have when treating children for vaccine injury is people who come in and say, look, our little bub was fine, developing really well, the milestones were really good. They started to say words, before 12 months of age. And then after either the 12-month vaccine or the 18-month vaccine, all of a sudden the language stopped and the eye contact changed. And they weren't as empathetic to the loved ones, the people they knew and trusted, their parents, their siblings, as they were before. And now, X number of years later, they're diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. So this business about the MMR vaccine, or in the 18-month case, the MMRV vaccine, not having an influence on autism rates is simply wrong. There's just so much data now which shows that it does. And when you get a sudden change like that, and sometimes these changes occur within 1 to 2 weeks after the vaccine, it makes the treatment so much easier because we know what we're dealing with. And look, there certainly can be inherited predispositions. There can be genetic weaknesses. There can be external toxicity from different sources. But when it's as sudden as that, you know where you should start. And that makes the job a lot easier. But it's tragic. I mean, what a shocking thing to happen. And it can destroy families' lives. But it's not the only cause of autism, by the way. I'm not saying that for a moment. But vaccination is one cause. And that's one comparison when we make with HP. Immunise without taking that sort of risk. Because we can't say in advance if a child is going to be as severely affected as that or not. Some people can get all the needles they or someone else want and they appear to be unaffected. Other people can have one and be profoundly affected. We just don't know in advance. So why take the risk when you don't have to? And that's what Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, he was a very spiritual man. And let me put it that way, that he, throughout his writings, talked about God. Now, not everyone likes that, but that's okay. The divine presence or the energy pervading us, or whatever word you want to use. And he basically said, God has given us simple things to deal with what it can also harm us. And that's what he was coming from. He was coming from doing both treatment and prevention in a way that was safe, that would not cause further harm. And I just loved homeopathy because of that thing, so that view of his of how the world is, because it is like that if we allow it to be like
that. My understanding, or at least what I'm starting to, I say starting to, it's kind of been there for me for a really long time. I think that I've been hesitant to say these things out loud until, about a year ago, is that what I'm noticing is that when we're using this form of immunization or anything to do with medications, pharmaceutical medications that apparently help us with our health, what it's actually doing is deteriorating our energetic body. So it's like we're taking this external thing and it is doing something to us energetically and spiritually that is then causing us to become unwell. That feels like the thing that makes sense most to me. And I get that not everyone thinks that way, but I can't help but notice that even when I do, I see a wonderful homeopath that works with your daughter. And anytime I go to her for physical symptoms, we very rarely end up treating the physical symptom. It is always an energetic, emotional thing that we're dealing with. And I'm like, hang on a second. Why is it that all of this random stuff is coming up in me when I take remedies? And then I suddenly, I find that I've become more confident. I've become more, I believe in myself more. I call them my antennas. So my intuition has become so much stronger. My sense of self has become stronger. Yes, I still have the physical symptoms that I had, have been trying to work with. There's only 2 left of the multiple that started after I got the virus. So I didn't get the shot, but I am predisposed because of other things, and I had spoken about that with Leah on the show. But what do you think about that theory? Like, because it just does seem like it's diminishing and deteriorating our actual essence.
Well, it's lovely the way you've explained that, and you've covered a few different points in there. When I talk to students, I do podcasts around the world from time to time when I'm invited, And when I talk to students about treating vaccine injury, generally when I treat vaccine injury, we use homeopathic potencies of the vaccine. And people often think, and this is homeopathic students often think, that the remedy is healing the person when they get better. But it's not. What the remedy is doing is removing a block which the vaccine caused, the shock, physical, mental, emotional of the vaccination caused, which is preventing our God-given self-healing mechanism from rebalancing. Because we're all born with this capacity that if we get pushed out of balance on any level, that if we're healthy, will automatically come back to balance in a relatively short period of time, because that's built into us when we're born. But the thing that can stop it from working is if there's a trauma. This is why PTSD is so significant, because following an emotional trauma, maybe nothing physical involved, that can block the self-balancing mechanism from bringing us back to balance. It's like, okay, the healthy young infant, they get vaccinated. Bang, there's a block there. What the homeopathic remedy does is remove the block. Slowly, doesn't always happen immediately. And once that's removed and starts to break down and gets less and less of an influence, eventually the self-healing mechanism can bring us back to balance. Now, there's a whole range of reasons why we have a predisposition towards certain conditions, for example. And a lot of that can be inherited. A lot of it can be DNA. But once again, that's something we're born with, which is preventing the full return to balance from the homeopathists call it the vital force. It doesn't matter what the word is, what the term is, but this rebalancing mechanism which can prevent it from working. So the other thing is, the other part of what you were saying, is that what you've just shown is that unlike the way that most orthodox medical people are taught, we are not a system where bits exist independent. The liver's different, therefore there's a kidney problem. We don't worry about the effect of what we might be giving on the liver. It's not like that. Everything is connected, mental, emotional, and physical on every level. And so when healing starts to occur, the natural healing response of a healthy person is to heal from within out. So in other words, if a person is suicidal, that's probably the most serious thing. I mean, genuinely suicidal, not just, carrying on in a bit of a state. Because obviously, if they're successful, that's the end of the show, for this life anyway. So if a person who has strong suicidal tendencies is well treated, they may become really agitated and they may become verbally critical. They may become very impatient, or they may become very hesitant and nervous. But none of those things are as serious as being suicidal. So if the suicidal tendency gets less and these other things come out for a while, that's the natural healing process. Physically, if a person has a problem with their heart or their brain in particular, they're the most serious physical organs. So if someone gives them a remedy for a heart condition and all of a sudden their skin breaks out in a horrible rash, that's wonderful. That's the natural healing process from within out, from the most serious to the less serious, because the skin, even though it can be damn annoying, is the least critical organ of the body, followed by the mucous membranes. And that's why often when you're going through a good healing process, not just with homeopathy, but with any good healing, where healing really is happening, you'll get skin eruptions or mucous membrane discharges, runny noses and things like that. People often talk about, I had a cold, I took the remedies and yeah, it was all right. I got a cold, a week later or a few days later. And that's good. That's the natural healing response. And so this is why if we can prevent in early childhood these blocks occurring, these blocks being imposed on our children, then our children will be in balance for much, much longer. So, you know, it's very simple, really, when you look at it from that perspective.
It's interesting you say that too, because even early on in my experience of trying to understand what had happened to me in 2020 and 2021, even though I didn't take the shot, when I started doing any work holistically, I did notice that it would get worse. And so I would abandon it because I'm like, oh my God, it's not working. It's not working. It's getting worse. It's getting worse. And I've, especially now that you've said what you've said, and I've been coming around to that the last 6 to 8 months, thinking it must be pushing whatever is in there out as much as possible. And it is really uncomfortable. I've spoken about the psoriasis I have and my sweating condition multiple times on the show. I can't seem to get any relief no matter what I do. But I was psoriasis free for a year, and then I started taking a beautiful herbal tincture and some remedies from a holistic therapist that I've been working with, and my psoriasis came back wild and in multiple places. And I keep saying to myself, it's healing. I'm healing from within. I'm healing from within. This is just temporary. But it is hard to have to, you go to someone for help and then it gets worse. And so it's really disheartening. But I think we need to change our perspective on what that it's getting worse is before we abandon it.
There's another aspect here too. It is possible, and I've done this myself over the decades, of going too quickly. We have to go at the pace that the patient tells it, the patient's symptoms tell us is a reasonable pace to go. And, we tend to be very impatient in the modern Western world. We want everything fixed. That's why drugs appear to be so attractive to many people.
Yeah.
Like a person's got eczema. Okay, get the cortisone, spread it all over the skin's healed. The fact that they then become asthmatic 6 months later, oh, that's a difference. They've got a new disease. No, they haven't. The eczema is actually whatever was wrong with them to begin with, being dealt with by the body's natural healing system, throwing it off on the least critical organ. So you suppress that, then you drive it to the next level down, the mucous membrane levels. The trio of asthma, eczema, and allergies. The DPT vaccine has a great affinity to that trio. It's caused a lot of those sort of problems. But you also, as a practitioner, can go a bit too quickly for the person. And everyone's different. And so I've made errors in the past when I've been treating people, trying to, let's get stuck into this. No. Sometimes, I think I've only ever put one person in hospital that I know of. And that was very early in my career. And it was a young lass who was asthmatic. And they came in for a vaccine detox. And I just went to a remedy too quickly in too high a potency, because the homeopathic remedies can, be made in a range of energetic potencies. And the young lass ended up in hospital for a few days. And I learned a big lesson. And that is, don't try and think you're wonderful. Listen to the voice of the patient's symptoms and try and let that tell you how fast you can go, how safe it is to go. And so normally these days, and for many, many years, I've always erred on the side of caution when it comes to vaccine detox. If a person has a history of health issues and skin issues, sometimes, sorry to tell you this, but skin issues are often the hardest to heal because they're the last to heal, because the skin is the least critical organ. But with psoriasis, there often can be a very strong inherited predisposition involved with psoriasis, as opposed to, say, eczema that's triggered by the vaccine. So everyone's different. That's the thing. Every one of us is different. Yeah.
Well, when the psoriasis got at its worst, I started asking Mum. I'm like, is there anyone else? And I learned that her older sister, has had it since she was little. I never knew. And so I thought, okay, so maybe when I got the virus, it turned the gene on in my body, the gene that we're talking about before, or the whatever it is that I think you said gene, that might have been the weak link, and it turned it on for me, and it just hasn't turned off. And so I'm like, okay, so maybe the virus load did that to me. And so I need to then maybe detox from the virus or something. I don't know. It's 6 years down the line, Dr. Golden, and I'm exhausted financially, emotionally, and physically.
I
Um,
can imagine.
like I said, yeah.
Yeah.
And you get gaslit. That's one of the other things that I want to bring up, because I think that people get so exhausted. And by the time they get to someone like you or Leah or someone like, my doctor of Chinese medicine, by the time we get there, we've already been so gaslit and told that we're making it up and it's just, you need to sleep. Well, I can't sleep. So how am I? That's not great advice. So we're exhausted by the time we get here anyway.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that I'm just like, it feels like we can't win in a lot of ways. My throat just, I wonder what that was.
I
I
think
think
some
that's
of
just me.
the most disappointing cases that I've ever had over the years are parents who brought their child to me vaccine injured, exactly in the way that you've just described, as being exhausted by trying so many different things. And you sit down with the first consultation, they've been to this therapist, different types of modalities, orthodox and not orthodox. And so you make a start, and because it doesn't work immediately, you don't see them again. And you think, what a
Yeah.
shame, because the history was there. This is going to take time, sometimes years. Very often, like if you start with a child who's deeply autistic, no language, and no empathy, no eye contact with people, and it followed a vaccine injury, a clear vaccine never well since case, then you know that you should be able to make a very big difference, but it might take a long time. And when people get to that stage of being exhausted, very often it's so difficult to give enough time with a particular modality just to see if it can
Yeah.
help. And I'm not saying you did that or anything. I've got no idea at all. But it's a very, very common thing. It's really is very sad, because sometimes you could have made quite a bit of a difference, but people. I talked about being impatient. You can understand why people are impatient for their own
Mm.
health or the health of their loved ones after years of having a problem. The one person I'll never forget is a lady who came to see me for uh, treatment for a skin condition. I think it was more eczema than psoriasis, but she'd been given massive amounts of cortisone as an infant. She had been in New Zealand for about 10 years, and she'd been on treatment for 10 years. And she had been in just distress, letting this all come out, all of the suppression from the cortisone come out for 10 years. And when she saw me, she was almost healed. And I just thought to myself, I am so lucky that this poor woman has been through all that trauma for such a long time. She was braver than I would have gone back to the drugs, I think, than the cortisone. But, well, I hope I wouldn't, but possibly I would have. I mean, I don't reject pharmaceutical medicine outright. I think that's a mistake as well, because there are times when an antibiotic is the best thing for a person. There's times when prednisolone is the best thing for a person for short-term relief. But then the problem is, if you keep on using those things,
Yes.
using them, it just builds up other chronic illnesses. And, I'm 77 now. Occasionally I go to the doctor for different things, maybe a blood test, or, I've done something stupid working. And they're all amazed that I'm not on any pharmaceutical medications at my age. And we have the potential not to be. If we just use pharmaceutical medication sensibly, if you definitely need something in an emergency, use it, and don't feel guilty. Don't think you've let yourself or anyone down, because it gets you through that quickly and
Yeah.
easily and comfortably, and then you get back to a reasonably healthy routine without being fanatical about it. Then you should have as good a health as you're able to, and that's what the blessing is. And I mean, reasonable health. I mean, I've got aches and pains everywhere. I played rugby for a few years, and you never end up symptom free from that. But it is such a blessing having reasonably good health, and that's what's the tragedy, that the majority of people might be living longer, but they're not living healthier.
No.
And you hear it on the news. Oh, we're living longer and we're living healthier. Well, we're not. The data shows we're not. I mean, I remember hearing something from the Australian Bureau of Statistics not that long ago, maybe at the beginning of this year. 82% of all Australians have some long-term condition, and that's defined as a condition that's lasted longer than 6 months. 82%. And when the ABS, I love statistics, when the ABS used to give a report about every 12 years on chronic illness, because there's a difference between a condition and an illness, the last lot of figures, and then they stopped, by the way, about 25 years ago. The last lot of data that they put out showed that over 40% of children in Australia had at least one chronic illness. And I mean, that is just shocking. 40% of our children. And that's just leading to a society as it ages to get worse and worse and worse. And that's what's happened. Absolutely.
But I just even think of when I was a child, I'm turning 42 in the next couple of days. And I remember as a child in school, no one had illnesses. Like there was hardly any allergies. There was hardly anyone with, that was autistic. Hardly. And now it's so common that it's really confronting when you look at it. And one of the things I have been told over and over again by specialists, just keep specialists, is this is just what happens when you get older, or it's perimenopause, or this is just what happens to women. By women, I'm being told these things. So I think that we've become really conditioned to believe that as we get older, this is just what happens. As you get older, you start taking statins. As you get older, you need to get medicine to bring down your cholesterol. No one talks about, I even had a gastroenterologist tell me that she cannot help anyone, or nutrition cannot help to heal the gut. I paid $380 just to walk out. I'm sorry, what?
I said that's why we should trust experts.
Yeah. Completely. So this is why I'm at the point where I laugh now. I walk in and yes, I pay ridiculous amounts of money just to get some clarification. But every time I walk out, the clarification I get is that everything that I'm doing is already on the right path, and I'm just trying to get validation for something because I don't understand what the root cause of my issues are.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I really want to get into your book, because there were two things that really stood out for me. We're kind of touching on them now. Yeah. So I'm going to hold the book up because I want people to know which book I'm talking about. So you've published a number of books, but this is the one that your most recent one, and the one that I read. Yeah. So there were two things that really stood out for me. The first one was about the amount of studies that have been done on the effectiveness of homeopathic remedies for immunising children. Can you share some of your findings? That you mentioned that you love statistics. So talk statistics as to what you had been seeing and some of those studies.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate in 2008. I was invited by the Finlay Institute, which is one of the 5 scientific institutes in Cuba, in Havana, to be lead speaker at a thing it was in December 2008 called Nosodes 2008. And they were bringing together people around the world who were experienced in HP, and somehow they found out my details, saw what I'd done, the data I'd collected up to then, and they invited me over because that really changed my ability to collect a lot of data. And so I worked with the people at the Finlay Institute. The president at the time was one of the most amazing real scientists I've ever met, Dr. Concepcion Campajuego. Everyone called her Conchita. She was the only woman on the National Council of Cuba at the time. She was a very dear friend of Fidel Castro. And, Castro had a lot of bad points, but he loved natural medicine. And so,
isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is. And so he put her in charge of the scientific institute that made vaccines, and they sent vaccines all around the world. But I went back three other times, and things changed in 2015, unfortunately. Fidel basically was sidelined. His brother wanted more revenue, so Finlay Institute stopped you doing homeopathy and just went back to its main thing, vaccination, because that's how they could earn foreign exchange. But in that period of time, I had first-hand access to all of their data, and they'd done some amazing interventions initially in 2007, 2008 in leptospirosis, which was would flare up in the eastern provinces of Cuba every hurricane season. And if it was a severe hurricane season, because of the disease is carried through rat urine, so when there's a lot of standing water, it's carried more freely and affects humans. And so they did some massive interventions, 2.2 million people in those three provinces with great success. And then they went on to do other interventions as well. I had really good access there. And then in 2015, because things had changed in Cuba, I went to India for the first time. And I did that because I came across an article published by a couple of doctors over there talking about how they managed to deal with the Japanese encephalitis outbreak. It was endemic in Andhra Pradesh. And they talked about immunising homeopathically 20 million children a year. And I thought, how on earth could they immunise 20 million children? And when I went over there, I found that our Andhra Pradesh had 80 million people. So, yeah, 20 million children at age 15 and under. That statistic makes sense. And they went from hundreds of deaths and thousands of notifications a year after 3 years of doing this to zero. But when you looked statistically at the states around Andhra Pradesh, they still had the similar, their previous incidences of Japanese encephalitis. And so the second time I went, well, right at the end of that trip, I was interviewed basically by the deputy principal of the CCRH, the Central Council for Research in Homeopathy. They were the ones I mentioned before who worked out the remedy for Mr. Modi when COVID first hit, who were headquartered in Delhi. And the next time I went over to India doing lectures and things like that, they invited me there. And so I had 4 visits where I was working at the CCRH. I was very, very blessed to have that opportunity and collected a lot of data. And this is really the crux of what's in the book that you've shown. I've only looked at 3 countries because they had the best available data on the interventions that they've done. So these are real world interventions. They're not clinical experiments where you can fiddle around with the variables and come up with the result you want. These are actual government recordings of what happened when there was an epidemic came through of a particular disease, a whole range of different diseases, and how effective or otherwise the homeopathic prophylaxis was. And so getting access to the CCRH data, the Cuban data, and also Brazil had quite a bit of published data using HP because they used it quite extensively. I've only used the data from those 3 countries, and in one of the articles that I'd written leading up to the book, the 2019 article in the local homeopathic journal Similia, I only looked at government and government accredited data, from things like universities. That's what I mean by government accredited. In other words, government institutions like the Finlay Institute was in Cuba that have prepared the evidence, the data. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always right. of course. But what it means is that it's prepared by people who are professionals, who are reporting to their government, and they would have the best access to the data available in their country. And in the book, it shows over 250 million annualized doses. And when we talk about an annualized dose, what we're basically saying, like if you've got someone who, let's talk about vaccines for a minute, who's vaccinated once a year for 5 years. Now, people would say, okay, when they're doing a count of how often, say, flu vaccine was used, they'd count that as 5. So that's an annualized count. So the 250 million is exactly using that methodology. You could say 250 million annualized people. In other words, looking at 1 year as a particular measurement. And that's a huge amount of data. And so the processing of the data was not easy because we can't do regular analyses using the standard orthodox methodology, because the different outbreaks were not what we call homogeneous. They weren't all exactly the same. So you can't combine all of those together in the normal way that it's done in orthodox medicine and orthodox statistics. So I devised a way of combining the data which measured, gave you, 90%, 40%, 100%, whatever, with the data that was not quantitative. In other words, highly successful, moderately successful, not very successful at all, and worked out a way to actually merge those two bodies of data and came up with a figure around 89, 90% effectiveness. Now, my own research, I've finished that off at Swinburne Uni from 2000 to 2004. And that was just looking at the evidence I'd collected from my own patients using HP in Australia. My single figure measure of that experience was 90.4%. And the 95% confidence limits were very tight around the mean. I think they were something like 87.6 to 93.4, or something like that. And that's important when you can measure confidence limits, because if you say 90% effective, but the confidence limits were 45% to 100%, it means you really haven't got something you can rely on, because there's such a huge amount of variability. But when they're close around the central point, the mean, then that means it gives a lot of confidence. And so what that showed was that the data that was the huge amount of data that we've got for epidemics is very, very similar to the small amount of data for what we call endemic. So the difference is, let's say whooping cough in Australia, it's in the country the whole time. Every 4 years or so, it has a bit of a peak and then down, and then a bit of a peak and so on. That's called endemic, as opposed to something which almost everyone gets. That's an epidemic. And epidemics can occur regularly or not. But certainly even when whooping cough peaks, it's not in epidemic proportion. So mine was the first real study using very rigorously supported data at the university by people who really knew what they were doing there, looking at endemic data. And it was the same, around 90%. So that's why we can say with great confidence that we have a large amount of data, government data mostly, saying that we've got a level of protection in normal circumstances around the 90%. That's just as good as any vaccines. I know the measles vaccines claims to be 99% after 2 doses. Well, even the previous editor of the journal Vaccine, Dr. Poland, wrote that 99% is just not on. It's really around 90, if we're going to be honest. So we've got something that is comparably effective, but without any risk of downside. And that's the key thing. We've got to break the cycle of chronic disease that our country's in and so many other countries are in. You look overseas, and the countries that, in the developed countries, the Western countries, if you like, that where the incidence of chronic disease is much less, their vaccination schedule is much less. And I see in America, Trump has now brought into law that they can have as many vaccines as they want. Some people say he's banning vaccination. That's not true. People can get vaccinations for their children if they want, but he's basically now saying we're going to follow the best practice around the world in developed countries, and they've reduced the number of mandatory vaccines significantly. That on its own will make a tremendous difference over time. He won't be around to see it, but it will make a very big difference because it'll start bringing the American rates of chronic illness down to some of those European countries, particularly the Scandinavian countries that are much better than us. And I just only hope that there are enough politicians one day in Australia to have the intelligence to do a similar thing.
Well, that's the other thing that I really realized. So the second penny that dropped for me was exactly what you're talking about. So I was thinking to myself, given the results, given that the government knows, like, how is it? And I know for myself that homeopathic remedies are quite inexpensive. So why is the government not at least offering it as an alternative when it could save the country millions in healthcare spend every year? The cost benefit case seems obvious to me. So why do you think it is that they're not taking that up?
Well, it comes down to dollars. And,
Yeah.
Governments have a great propensity to spend our money because it doesn't cost them individually anything. Look, it's to do with the massive financial hold of the pharmaceutical drug cartels on health systems around the world. And you can tell by the massive attack on Kennedy in America when he became secretary of HHS, and it's still going on. And it is very political. I mean, I don't know if you remember the Health Australia Party, but I co-founded that with other people in 2015, and we gave it a shot for 7 years. We came within 200 votes of getting elected in Victoria, but we didn't. And the thing that disappointed me so much was once you were inside the political system, we were very unpopular. But
I was scared.
the more to the left, the more to the left the other political parties were, the more they attacked us. And that's not saying the political parties on the right didn't attack us, but not with the same ferocity. And I was really surprised because, like the Greens, I used to vote Green when Bob Brown started. He was a doctor, wonderful doctor, still is. And, it was lovely. I just really shared the passion for the environment, for natural things. But boy, when the Health Australia Party was running, the party that attacked us most of all was the Greens. And I just couldn't work it out because a party that says we want nature to be protected and preserved, but when it comes to us and what we put in our bodies, no, we want drugs, we want vaccines. It didn't make sense. And we found a lot of the old greenies were really, really unhappy about what was happening. And we got quite a few of them come across, but it's a different, cohort now, put it that way. And it's such a shame, But anyway, politics is a nasty, messy business. They are controlled, I'm sure, by money. And so, money talks, money makes the media change what they say, makes politicians not think. And as I said, over COVID, there were just a handful, literally, of politicians across the whole spectrum, left and right, and in the middle, who actually spoke up about what was going on with COVID. It was, so disappointing, but that's the way it is. And the only way we're going to change it is by voting sensibly. And look, I'm not advocating for any new trends or anything like that. All I'm saying is it's been so disappointing for so many years. We've got to do something different because, as dear old Einstein said, the definition of insanity is someone keeping doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We're not going to get a different result if we keep doing the same thing. That's for sure.
Well, it's unfortunate that Australian politics has completely lost its way as well.
Yeah,
I think, and in 2015, I did not care about politics. I was literally the person who would pick the prettiest flyer, and I thought they have a really good marketing team. I just wanted to get it over with to not get the fine. It was only it was only in 2021 where I was just like, hang on a minute, I should care. And so I think a lot of us educated ourselves as to how voting works, what the parties are about, who actually funds those parties. Like we really got into it. So I think that a party like that would really thrive now. It would really have a chance
absolutely.
now that a lot of our eyes have been open. I remember
You
someone
were
saying
10
to me,
years
when
too
did you
early.
wake up? Yes,
10 years too
visionary,
early.
Dr. Golden, you were. You saw the future.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I didn't see COVID coming.
Well, I don't know that any of us saw that whole debacle coming, but it is interesting that there was no flu during those 2 years. No one died of the flu or anything else, really, for that matter. It sounds like it's like nobody died of anything else but COVID during that time, which just
Yes, it makes you
absolutely
suspicious of the statistics.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You have very obviously had a lot of pushback on all of your work and your opinions. Why do you think mainstream medicine and just mainstream media in general is so, I'm going to use the word afraid of you and your message?
Yeah, I'm actually still under a $70,000 fine from the TGA if I send immunisation related remedies overseas, so I don't. And
Oh,
so when I have
God.
people from overseas, we have to organise a different way for them to get their medicine. So, yeah, look, I was investigated twice by the New South Wales Health Department, twice by the Victorian Health Department when I started, and based on complaints by doctors. And they realised I wasn't doing anything illegal because I've never advertised. You see, I've never
Mm.
advertised homeoprophylaxis. I've advertised books that I've written. I've advertised courses that I've offer, but I've never advertised the remedies. I never will, because if I did, I know I would have been out of business in a shot. So really, it's just conditioning. It's believing the experts. It's not listening to a better side of yourself in a way, like people who are so force themselves to be so narrow and only accept such a rigid view of health and healing and who we are as people. Um, Unfortunately, some of these people can be brilliant in other ways, particularly surgery and things like that. Some surgery is absolutely incredible what it can do, and some isn't, of course. But that there are many, many really brilliant lives that are wasted because they're within a system that is rigid and narrow and confined. If they would only open their hearts and open their minds to other options and look at the data. You see, if you look at my website, I never try and explain how HP works on the website. I only try and explain we don't know how it works, but we know that it does work. Well, in a different level, we do know how it works, but it's not an explanation that orthodox people would accept and would confuse many people who weren't familiar with the more energetic side of who we are. So I just relied on the data. And even people who are meant to be very data focused, very evidence based, when it comes to natural medicine, particularly homeopathy, that
Mm.
willingness to be evidence based is gone. They just close down. And it's training. Training is a huge thing, and the pharmaceutical drug cartels influence medical training enormously. And that's the tragedy of it all. It's all to do with money for the people who benefit. See, they've got a wonderful uh, business model. Point one, reduce the incidence of infant mortality. Point two, increase the incidence of longevity. Point three, increase the incidence of chronic illness. You're going to make as much money as you can think about. Now, even it's starting to backfire a bit because longevity in America is starting to fall. And so they're losing some of their market a bit earlier than they'd expected to. But I mean, it's a very cynical and a very horrible business model. But that's the business model that we're facing around the world at the moment. And that's why people like Kennedy are being attacked so viciously, because he's out to break that business model. I don't know if he can do it. God willing, he will. We'll see. He's got 2 years left, maybe.
That, and I think, Dr. Golden, it's up to us to actually open our hearts and minds to the fact that we've been lied to for so long. I think that we can't rely on one person fighting everyone's fight. This is all of our fight. We all need to do something about this. We all need to educate ourselves. It's not about educating other people necessarily. Share your information, but educate yourself first. And it's really interesting that you said that thing about data, because I feel like, especially during COVID in the last 6 years, everyone quotes the data and the science and all, until you give them alternative data. And they're like, well, you know what? The data doesn't matter because, and I have had people say that to me word for word. Well, the data doesn't matter. And I'm like, but you just said the data matters. So I think it's up to all of us to educate ourselves. And I get that some people will just never want to admit they've been duped or accept they've been duped, and they'll dig their heels in, and that's fine. That's their life's journey. But it is all of our responsibility to do that learning.
Absolutely. Yep.
So then after everything, right, after the research, the criticism, the family experience that started it all, what's the thing you want most for people to walk away understanding, not so much about homeopathy, but about you? Because the attacks have been quite personal to you. So what is it that you want people to know about who you are, and if there's anything that you want to clear up for anyone?
Well, that's a lovely way to put it, Chanel. Thank you. I don't usually think about it in terms like that, about what I want people to think about me. Basically, I mean, what I just hope for is that people will get an opportunity to see for themselves what options are available, and then observe the changes, the differences. I mean, every day I talk to parents, I'm told we can see how our unvaccinated child is so much healthier than their vaccinated peers. I mean, it's such a common thing you hear these days. And of course, I hear it probably more than most people because that's the area I'm in. In terms of me personally, I mean, if I've been able to make a contribution towards that happening, to people seeing that there are options, then I'd be very satisfied. And if a miracle does happen in Australia and we get to a point where parents are given by the government, state and federal, a genuine opportunity to make a choice based on evidence, based on data, to either immunise homeopathically or immunise using vaccines, no coercion either way, then that would be a wonderful day. And I would, be completely satisfied. Whether it'll happen in my lifetime, I don't know, but we'll see.
Well, look, at the most human level, you are a dad that saw something happen to your child that you did not think it was okay. You sought out a solution, you learned about it, you then immersed yourself in the industry, and you now want to make sure that other parents don't experience the same thing. And I think at the basic human level, that is what guides us all when something horrible like that happens. And none of us want to go through things like that. I don't have children, but I certainly advocate for my dogs the way that a parent, I would assume, advocates for their children when something happens. So I think, like I said, basic human level, you're just a parent that gave a crap and wanted to do something about it. So I could talk to you for hours about all of this, Dr. Golden. It's been so eye-opening even for me as someone who uses homeopathy, administers it to my dogs and recommends it to anyone who will listen. But I'm so glad that you've had this conversation with me and you've spoken about all the things that you have very openly. Please share with my listeners where they can buy your books or learn more about your courses.
My books are on Amazon, but they're also available for Australian viewers through my website, which is homstudy.au. So study, study.au. And if people would like to contact me, then my email is homstudy, same spelling, at bigpom.com. And yeah, look, it's been wonderful having such a chat. I didn't know quite what to expect, Chanel, but it's been a lovely chat. And thank you so much for your interest. I appreciate it.
Oh, the more I can share your work, the more I will. And for all those who are listening, if you are interested in learning more about Dr. Golden's work or purchasing any of his books, I will leave in the description below links and ways you can do that. So if you haven't already, head on over Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Instagram. Subscribe to the show. Be the first to know when new episodes drop. Dr. Golden, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
After a conversation like that, where does one even begin to reflect on the subject of safe immunization, especially when so many of us experienced and continue to experience the aftermath of the COVID pandemic and the subsequent rise in chronic illness across the board and across the globe? I can't help but sit here and want to point fingers and hate on the establishments that run and ruin our lives behind closed doors for power and profit, but pointing the finger isn't the solution, regardless of how good it feels. Instead, I want to ask each and every one of you to take time out of your day to learn more about different modalities, especially in the more natural healing spaces, and to share what you learn with others and help wake up humanity. By doing that, we become more confident to self-advocate, but we also have more choice. It gives us the opportunity to also say no to pharmaceutical medications where other options exist that are less invasive, have no side effects, and actually contribute to our quality of life. I'm genuinely having to restrain myself from going on a rant here. I'm a week out from my cycle, and the rage my hormones bring during this time makes for some very heated internal debates about what I should and shouldn't say. But here is what I do know. As someone who has suffered immensely over the last 6 years, who has seen every specialist, tried every modality, run every MRI, CT scan, blood test, stool test, nerve test, and seen every possible practitioner you could imagine, I've really had to endure a lot, like a pincushion. It's been emotionally extremely taxing for me, as well as financially. I keep saying that, but it really has. I've spent over $10,000 on it over the last 6 years. But what I can say, hand on heart, is that every appointment solidifies more and more what I believe to be true about healing and wellness. And I have to say, every time I've been gaslit, every time I've sat across from someone who has spent hundreds and thousands of dollars on their education that tell me things like nutrition doesn't heal the microbiome, or that there's nothing we can do about experiencing symptoms of menopause, which is untrue completely. If all the information that I have learned and all the specialists that I've spoken to up until now, we can do something about experiencing menopause and the symptoms of it. But all the wild things that have come out of the mouths of the very people we've been indoctrinated to treat as, the specialists, as whatever they say is gospel, I consistently come back to the one thing that remains true and seemingly connects all the dots on my walls that currently have red string webbed across them, as one would expect to see in a crime scene investigation. Regardless of your belief system, there is an undercurrent that connects us all. You are an energetic being having a human experience. That is the truest thing that I could possibly say. And that's not my opinion. That is what we are all, as humans, here to be. Energetic beings having a human experience. So it would be plausible that an interference in your energetic system would manifest as physical symptoms. And when we suppress those symptoms with drugs, alcohol, food, medication, sex, or whatever your vice of choice is, we get sicker. And unfortunately, because most of us are not in the peak state of wellness, we don't realize that we are actually experiencing symptoms, because everyone experiences those symptoms. It's familiar, isn't it? Oh, it shakes me to my core. It makes me so angry. But if you consider that our physical self is the only way our energetic self can communicate with us, it makes perfect sense that any interference, whether physical like a parasite or a vaccine, or something emotional like trauma, would show up in ways we might not understand if we aren't paying attention. So whatever it is you're experiencing, don't dismiss it. Sit with the symptom. Understand the triggers. Document them in a journal. Ask multiple practitioners across different areas of practice and modalities for their opinions and solutions. There is no one-size-fits-all, no single cure for anything in life. It is a multi-factored approach. And that's what I love about homeopathy. There are thousands of remedies that can be used interchangeably in different doses for different things. Where conventional medicine fails, in my very humble opinion, not going to rant, is in finding the root cause. It is essential for us to excavate the layers of our physical health, understand the history of self, and be prepared to deal with the things that make us feel uncomfortable for the greater good of healing. I can tell you now, healing is not linear, it is not painless, and it comes with some sacrifice. And not all of us are built to withstand some of that, but if you are open to it and willing to try, I promise you, it is worth it. Until next time, with gratitude and grace, have a wonderful day.